Welcome to bizsugar Live. Today, I'd like you to join us to find out why customer care should be more about conversation and building relationships and less about running campaigns. Our expert today is Brooke Sellis, founder and CEO of B² Media. Brooke specializes in social media listening to determine what your customers really want, and then she takes that listening and teaches you how to build community and superior customer care for your clients' customers. B² Media focuses on driving measurable business growth. They can show you how to get your business proven results by applying data analysis, and this ensures that you make better data-driven decisions. Let's hear from Brooke.
Hey, thank you so much, Gail, for having me. So excited to be here. We have a bunch to cover, so I'll run through the slides quickly, not too quickly, but quickly enough so that we have time at the end for any Q&A that anyone might have. So to get started, I will tell you a little bit about me. Oh, there we go. I am a horse mom. That is my fur baby, Diva, that you see there in the picture. I founded B² in 2012. So we're coming up actually on our 10th year anniversary, which is very exciting. And as Gail told you, we're a social first agency. So we typically help clients, small, middle market, enterprise sized brands with social media marketing, paid media, so advertising on social and search, and then what we're going to talk about today, which is online customer care solutions. I also teach a digital marketing course at the University of California in Irvine, and all of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today is in an upcoming book that I have coming out in June. If you want to find out more about the book or get a free excerpt, and then we've got goodies coming up for those people on this list, you can just go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/B2 and book. And I'll put that up again later if we want to talk more about that. So let's get started. I want to take us back a little bit. We're going to jump in a time machine and we're going to go back to the 1970s, because to really understand how we gain trust and loyalty, there's a theory, a social theory that I want all of you to understand. So how do we build trust? If you actually look at the social penetration theory, which was formed by two social psychologists back in the 1970s, Altman and Taylor, they came up with this hypothesis and this social psychology theory that essentially said the way we form relationships is by disclosing information to one another. So ultimately, as we disclose information to one another, you receive that disclosure and you say, I align with that. I like that person's values. And then you disclose information back. So through these back and forth self-disclosures, we get more and more intimate with the person that we're talking to. Naturally, the more we spend time with other people or with brands, the more we are likely to self-disclose information about ourselves. So if you look at this fun little image I have here, the social penetration theory, terrible name, obviously named by psychologists and not marketers. It's also called the onion theory. Here's what it means to peel the onion, right? We've got the breadth of conversations, but when you're going around in breadth, it's usually superficial, right? There's not much there that builds trust. And this is where most brands actually live with their content, which we're going to talk about today. If you go deeper, you can get more intimate, more personal. And eventually, if you go through the depth of the onion, you get to the core values of the brand and the people who the brand is trying to connect with. So let's dig a little bit deeper and look at the 4 different levels of disclosures. So there's 4 types, right? Cliches, facts, opinions, and feelings. Cliches are where most brands sit, or cliches and facts. Cliches are regular everyday responses that we provide in social settings. So like this is like, hey, how are you? Fine. Even if you're not fine, right? You say you're fine. How's the weather? Hey, did you see the Red Sox last night? This is cliche conversation, right? Then there's facts. The thing about facts is to be considered a self-disclosure, to build trust and loyalty, facts must actually fit the criteria of being intentional, significant, and not otherwise known. Here's an example of a fact from me that's not known. My first name is actually Jennifer, but I've gone by Brooke since birth, right? That's a fact. it's an interesting fact because most people don't know that my first name is Jennifer, but that I've gone by Brooke since birth. But facts like we're open from 9 to 5 today, or here's our new special on airline flights. Those are facts, right? So cliches and facts are where most brands sit with their content marketing. And this is why they're having such a hard time building loyalty and trust. Now let's talk about opinions and feelings. Opinions are obviously more revealing than facts. They expose more information about you or the brand and what your values are. A fact is an objective truth, where opinion means it's true for you. So a fact is it's raining. An opinion is when it's rain, I think it's depressing, right? I get depressed, or it's depressing when it rains. That's an opinion. That's taking it deeper to a different level. That's building trust, building loyalty. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. Then the deepest level of disclosure is feelings, right? These are the deepest levels of disclosure where we reveal information about how the relationship might develop. We're sharing emotional things versus factual things. And these disclosures are particularly important for boosting empathy and trust. So feeling type content is important for brands who want to build trust with their audiences. Fun fact, this is me in college. I actually did my undergraduate research on the social penetration theory and applied it to Facebook. And specifically what I did was I looked at, can brands use the social penetration theory, which was formed way back in the 70s, to build trust and loyalty with their audiences, communities, customers. And what I found is, yes, they can. This is me actually presenting my thesis work at the state capitol in Harrisburg. So let's get on to some examples. Here is an example of cliche content. This is Pro Flowers, and they have a beautiful picture of flowers, but it says, this is your reminder to stop and smell the roses. You can see it got 9 comments, 6 likes, 7 retweets, not that much engagement. This isn't doing much to help me align with the brand, right? This is pretty cliche. Then here's United Airlines. This is factual content. Weekly deals from New York and Newark under $120 round trip. It's not doing much to build trust or loyalty. It's not doing much to tell me about the values that United Airlines has as a brand, and if I, as a consumer, relate to that, right? This is factual content. Not doing that great. Here's an example again from Pro Flowers of opinion content. I can't and won't slander carnations. They're gorge. Unpopular opinion. So yes, this is opinion content, but it's not really doing much to tell us about how Pro Flowers is as a brand. And it's not helping me align with their values as a brand, right? But it's still opinion content. So A+ for effort. Now, here is a brand, which I recommend you all follow on LinkedIn, called LinkedIn Marketing Solutions. Here's opinion content from them. And they say, agree or disagree, B2B content can be just as fun as consumer content. And you can see how much response they got. They got 262 reactions and 26 comments, right? And people are agreeing or disagreeing and sharing their opinions back. Right? So now we've got a two-way dialogue happening, a conversation that's connecting. Here is an example of Walmart with feelings content. So you can see they've got a post with a father and son. It says, fatherhood is an epic story. And they ask people in the content of their post to share their dad's story or their moments of fatherhood. And for every dad tag, they'll donate $1 to the dad gang, up to 50,000. Dad jokes welcome. This is a great example of feeling content. They got, you can see, almost 2,000 likes. They had almost 1,000 different comments from people. Obviously, it's a contest, but guess what people were responding with their stories? They were responding with feeling content. So now we're connecting with Walmart in a way that uses feelings to build trust and loyalty. And on top of that, we're seeing what their values are, right? They value that father-son relationship, and they're actually donating money to the dad gang based on this post. So that's a great example of feeling type content. Here's another example from Patagonia. This is a little more what some people may call risky. I don't think so, but let's talk about it. Patagonia, which is a climate, a brand that's a big proponent of climate change, but it makes sense for their brand to be aligning their values with climate change because they're an outdoor apparel brand, right? So this is the post that they put out, and it says, Patagonia stopped all paid advertising on Facebook platforms in June 2020 because they spread hate speech and misinformation about climate change and our democracy. We continue to stand by that boycott 16 months later. So what they're saying is, here are our values. We support climate change. We will not support companies like Facebook who don't support climate change and spread misinformation about climate change. So what they're saying is, here's how we feel. Here's our brand values. And guess what? A lot of their followers, most of their customers, in fact, share those values because people who are outdoorsy and buy their apparel are probably believers in climate change. So that's an example of using feeling content in a way that will help you get closer to those audiences that align with your brand core values. Jay Baer also recently came out with a article called Broad is Flawed. And essentially what Jay said was that reimagined customers see the world through a new lens, and 2/3 of them want businesses they support to have a similar vision, meaning they want to find companies to buy from who share the same values and opinions and feelings that they have. And it's not just for products like clothes and cars. In fact, Jay's research found that 44% of reimagined customers would change banks, financial institutions, if their current bank stopped taking sufficient visual actions for social impacts. So he says basically, instead of trying to sell to all the people or sell to the most people without being quote unquote offensive, the new marketing is to sell to people who are aligned with your brand mission, knowing full well that you're going to offend a bunch of others. And this is actually part of the social penetration theory. It talks about dissolution, right? As people get to know you and your values, some of them will decide that they don't align. They won't like the brand, but that's okay. Your job isn't to get everybody to sign up for your list. It's not to get everybody to buy. It's to align your brand closer and closer to those people who will buy from you repeatedly and remain loyal to your brand. So let's talk about why social media is pretty much becoming the social channel of choice for most people. Unfortunately, a lot of it has to do with the pandemic. So because of the pandemic, digital transformation actually got thrust forward into a fast forward mode, and it's not looking like it's going to slow down. So these are charts from McKinsey, and this is a study that they did in 2021. And what they found was that on average, 80% of customer interactions are now online. That is the vast majority of customer and brand interactions. You can see in North America, the adoption acceleration moved forward by 3 years. Globally, it moved forward by 3 years. But in some of the industries, this McKinsey report says that digital transformation and social media adoption moved forward by 10 years, and they don't see it changing. Here's some more information from Sprout Social that came out recently. And what they found was that 71% of customers say they found themselves using social media more in the past year. This is from last year, so in 2021. And you can see by generation how much of that generation uses social media. Also, which we're going to talk about today, consumers' preferred channel for reaching out with a customer support service issue or question is now going towards social media. People don't want to call that phone line. We hate that hold music, right? People don't want to email. They'll go straight to social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, whatever their channel of choice is, and they're going to complain or ask those acquisition questions right there on social. It's also becoming the preferred channel for sharing feedback about product or service. So when we talk about customer care, we're actually talking about pre-purchase and post-purchase questions. So acquisition and retention. We're talking about the entire customer journey and how that's moving now to social media. Speaking of the entire digital customer journey, here is what ours looks like. So you may know the flywheel model from Jim Collins' book, From Good to Great. And the essential idea of the flywheel is that your customers are your best salespeople. And we totally believe that. But instead of having growth in the middle of our flywheel, what we actually have is customer care. Because what we found with our customer care clients is that when they do have this type of service available on social media, what they're able to do is both attract and retain new customers and current customers. So you can see kind of how our flywheel looks at attracting customers through conversations that connect with the social media content, by engaging with leads and communities with conversational content. And then once people are customers, delighting them by providing above and beyond customer experience. You can do this by focusing on their needs, wants, interests, and desires. And when happy customers love your brand and are loyal to your brand, they're going to share your brand with their peers and friends. So hopefully then that leads to the attract part, right? So we're just really using that little customer-centric philosophy to keep filling our pipeline with new customers and hopefully continuously making our current customers loyal. So when you think about your digital customer journey, I also want you to think about all of the stages that happen on social with your brand. How do people become aware of your brand? How do they decide that they're going to buy from you and not your competitor? When they purchase, what kind of online or e-commerce options do you have, right? Email is part of the digital customer journey too. SMS, we're not just talking about social, but how easy is it as the person makes their way through every stage of that digital customer journey? Where are your potholes? Where are the gaps? Where do you see people coming to you and saying, I'm having a problem with XYZ? That's something that you want to fix in that journey. Because one of the things I want to tell you is that everybody talks about customer experience like it's some sort of like red carpet situation where you have to roll out the red carpet for every single customer and throw a parade down that street. And that's just not scalable. It sounds scary, right? And what I think good customer experience is has nothing to do with the red carpet or the parade, but instead has to do with making things easier and easier at each stage, at each touch point throughout the digital customer journey. So if somebody tells you, hey, it's really hard for me to check out using your system, look into that. Figure out how to fix that and make it easier for people to make purchases online. Or when people join your loyalty program, if they say it's not a great loyalty program, take that feedback and see what you can do with it to get better. So it's again, it's not about the fanfare. It's about lowering the gaps, getting rid of the potholes along that path to purchase. So let's talk about social-led customer care, which I believe is the future of social media. So when we define social-led customer care, here's how we define it. It's essentially the service of responding to the specific demands, questions, and pain points of your current and would-be customers via social media. And what we are seeing is that more and more, just like that Sprout data you saw, we see this with our clients too. More and more people are using social media to ask acquisition questions. Again, that's pre-purchase, and I'll show you some examples, and ask retention or support questions. So they're already a customer, but they need help or some sort of support. They're doing this through social media. And as I'm sure I don't have to tell you, the unfortunate thing about social media is that they expect a response pretty much immediately. There's a lot of different data out there. Some of it says that they expect a response within an hour. Some of it says they expect a response within 30 minutes. Some of it says they expect a response within 15 minutes. But the moral of the story is they expect a response within about 1 hour, and that's 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So what we're talking about today is how to set yourself up to manage that, right? How can you be a 24/7 brand in a 9-to-5 world. And then the biggest thing I want you to understand about social ed customer care, this is one of the only marketing initiatives that both attracts and retains customers. Very few things do this. Things can attract customers, things can retain customers. Very few do both. So I want you to focus on this today, because who doesn't want to do both? And another reason why social ed care is so important is because we've got an audience, right? When somebody complains on social, the whole world is watching to see how you will respond. And here's the another unfortunate part. A lot of brands still aren't responding. They're letting that complaint hang out there for days, weeks, months, forever. And why that's bad is because this is research from the Wall Street Journal. Satisfied customers tell almost 4 people about their positive experience, which sounds really great, right? But then when you look at unhappy customers, they complain to, on average, 7 people. So think about that for a minute, because that's huge. If you're able to use social ed customer care and fix something, right? If somebody is complaining to you on social and you're able to come through, respond in a timely fashion, and fix what they're complaining about, you've probably turned that disgruntled customer into a more loyal customer, because you're listening to what they're saying and then you're fixing the problem and you're meeting them where they are, which more often than not these days is on social. So here are some examples for you, like I promised, of pre-purchased and post-purchase questions. So here's a brand I actually use. It's a hair brand called Kerastase. And this person went out on Twitter and said, "Hey, Kerastase, I'm having problems checking out. Is something happening?" They didn't respond. Now, this brand on Twitter has, I think, around 60,000 followers. They post often. They're pretty good about replying to a lot of the questions that they get. But for whatever reason, they didn't respond to this young lady. And by the way, she's in purchase mode. She's literally trying to check out. She's trying to give this brand their money, and they didn't come through and answer her. Then you see a week later, she comes back and she says, "It's been almost a week. I have pending charges, but none of my orders are going through. What is happening?" What do you think is going to happen to this customer and this brand? Do you think this person trusts this brand? Do you think this person feels loyal to this brand? And a lot of executives, when we have this conversation, say, "Well, oh, she should have reached out to email, or she should have called our phone support." Guess what? You don't get to say what the customer does. The customer decides what the customer does. The customer decides where they want to reach out to you. This customer decided she was going to do that on Twitter. And I can understand why, because like I said, the brand is pretty active. So they probably just lost a customer, and they probably just lost a few customers because people were watching this exchange, right? This is how I saw it. I don't know this person personally, so I just saw it because the world is a stage on social. Here is another example where David tagged Brother. They do printers, sewing machines, label makers. He tagged Brother Office and he said, "We've been looking for Brother color laser printers for many months and have several clients who are in need of them. Is there any information about when or whether this product will be available?" Right? So this is another pre-purchase question. Could also be considered post-purchase because it sounds like they've had this type of printer. And I think probably because of the supply and demand issues, they're not able to get it right now. So this is something that's happening again on Twitter. This is where this customer wants to find out acquisition information. So money for Brother. Here's another example of somebody reaching out to Brother, and they say, "My sewing machine either needs to be cleaned or is finally dying," which it's a Walmart Brother machine I've had since like 2013. So she's had a really good run. This is a lot of different things. This is pre-purchase and post-purchase because, again, it sounds like they've already purchased this machine, and it sounds like they want to purchase again, and it's a brand compliment to the printer that they're using. And by the way, if you notice, this person did not tag the brand. They're putting this information out there on Twitter, but not tagging the brand. And this is why we're going to talk about the importance of social media here in a minute. Here is another example of somebody going out on Twitter and saying, looking for some cool new social listening tools. SM Pros, what are you using? I actually saw this. I went in and I recommended Sprout Social, which is who we use and love. And then you can see Sprout Social came through and said, hey, Nikki, let us know if we can answer any questions. We're here to help. So this is an example of social selling. This falls under acquisition, right? Gaining new customers. And they didn't tag Sprout. I tagged Sprout as a user, that whole peer-to-peer recommendation in the flywheel that we talked about, right? Customers referring other customers. And then Sprout came in and offered to help as well. So how can you operationalize social-led customer care within your business? There is a 5-step process that you can use, which we call facts, triage, coding and tagging, analyzing, and then at the end of that, you want to innovate through the voice of the customer, or VOC is sometimes how that's written. So here's our 5-step process. You need to first figure out what your frequently asked questions are. Meaning, if you're looking at all of your social channels that you use, where do you get frequently asked questions? Do they happen on all of your social channels? Do they only happen on Facebook? Do they only happen on Twitter? And then what kinds of frequently asked questions are you getting? Are they pre-purchase questions? Are they post-purchase questions? Are they a combination of both? Then you'll want to triage your conversations, and we'll go through what that means. You'll want to use social listening to code and tag your conversations and gather social intelligence. Because unfortunately, like the example I showed you earlier, a lot of times customers are speaking to the brand. They mean to, with that brother example of the printer that was dying that they bought from Walmart, they didn't actually tag brother though. So sometimes people tag the brand incorrectly, or they're talking about the brand, but they don't tag them at all, but they still expect the brand to show up and meet them at that conversation. So we'll talk about that. Then you want to measure your goals. So what are your business goals? What are the key performance indicators related to those goals? And then what metrics do you want to track through social-led customer care, including sentiment, to make sure you're meeting those goals? And then how can you improve and innovate based on the voice of the customer? So let's go through it. Frequently asked questions is pretty easy. Once you figure out what those frequently asked questions are, you want to create some sort of living, breathing documentation that lists all of those questions that you've ever gotten. Helpful hint, if you've gotten them by phone or email for your support channels, put those in the document too, because as people move more to social media, they're likely to ask you those questions there as well. Make sure that the documentation is shareable and accessible for the entire team, meaning everybody who's using social to help you with your customer support. And if you're a larger company or you're part of a brand like banking that has a lot of red tape, legal may need to be a part of this process so that you can get approvals on some of those responses. So you'll want to have all of the questions. You'll want to have all of the approved responses. You'll want to have it available for the team. And then pretty much anybody can come in and answer those questions as they come through. You'll also want to decide if the questions are going to be answered by a bot, a human, or both. Bots can be great, but what we found is they typically only work well if you get very specific, very easy, frequently asked questions. Like, where are you located? Are you open on Saturdays? What are your hours today? Those kinds of things. Other tips, if you are going to use a bot and if your team's not available 24/7, which most of us aren't, you might want to list office hours on those channels where you get a lot of these questions. So, hi, we're not responsive 24/7. Our office hours for support are Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, whatever that looks like. And then bots may not work if you have complex issues or frequently asked questions that need answering. So like brother, for example, a bot would have a very hard time getting with somebody of these technical questions answered about the type of toner or fixing a paper jam. So you'll want to decide if bots are worth helping you out. Then we come to triage. The way we triage is pretty simple. It means that every conversation that comes in, that's one of those acquisition or retention questions, we are going to label or tag as green, yellow, or red. Green means your frontline people can handle it. Whoever's working for you on social, they can answer that question very easily. It's right there in that FAQ documentation. And They don't need to involve anyone else on the team. Just remember that inbounds, because social's 24/7, can come in 24/7, 365. And based on certain things that are happening, these things can surge unexpectedly. So users will expect that response within, let's just say, less than an hour. So you'll want to make sure that you're available to answer those questions as they come in. Yellows means that it's a question or a request that we haven't seen before. So yellows don't stay yellows. What usually happens, at least for our team, is we might have to go to our client and say like, hey, we got this really weird question about some printer model. How do we answer that? And they'll give us the answer, and then all of a sudden that turns into a green. So yellows are just things that haven't likely been documented yet. Once you get those yellows in, you'll want to find out what the appropriate response and approved response will be, and then turn it into a green, add it to your FAQ documentation, and now you can move along. Reds are things that your frontline probably won't be able to handle. So perhaps it's something that has to get passed to another team. So if we're talking about a bank, for example, maybe they're asking on social for their bank balance, or maybe they forgot their password. This is something that typically your social media team wouldn't be able to answer, would not have access to. So they would need to send that to a different department, customer support maybe, and have that taken care of. Or it might be something that it requires additional steps. So maybe somebody is reaching out on social and they want to return a product. Or they want to, say you're an appliance brand and they need a repair person to come out and fix the refrigerator, right? Those are things that need to be passed to another department. So you'll want to process that out as part of your triage. And then reds will go to that team to close out the ticket. Here's kind of an example of a chart of how triage works. So green, yellow, red, types of issues, who's the team that handles it, and then a few tips for you. So essentially, the better your playbook, the better your FAQ documentation, the better you have things processed out for when you need to send to other people, the faster and more efficient you'll get. And that's important because the number one thing people want with social ed customer care is responsiveness. And they want it, unfortunately, to happen really quickly. So social listening is another interesting thing. And I want to touch on the difference between social monitoring and social listening, because social monitoring is social 101, right? This is what we're likely all doing. This is where you receive a message or some sort of contact through social media and you respond back. That's great. That's basic social media marketing, but it's very reactive, right? Social listening, however, is proactive because what it does is allow you to listen to all of the conversations happening online about your brand, your industry, or your competitors, and join that conversation if you need to. Like the example I gave with Brother, where Brother wasn't mentioned, but if they were using social listening, they would actually receive that information in their inbox and they would be able to respond as Brother saying, hey, so glad your computers had, or your printers had such a great run. Here's some information on the new printer. And then my advice would be, give your frontline some sort of like bar tab, meaning help them get that acquisition to happen with urgency. Here's the new link to that printer that you're looking for. And by the way, if you buy today using the code, customer support XYZ, you'll get free shipping, right? Then that acquisition can happen right then, hopefully right there that day. And with the code that they use, it could actually be attributed to your customer support team. So when we talk about social media monitoring, this is the entry point. This is social media 101. It's social listening that allows you to get to that like graduate degree, let's call it. So here's an example for you. We actually have a banking client who wanted to quantify their biggest complaints around downtimes. So in banking, downtimes are scheduled maintenance of when the bank goes through upgrades with their systems. Using social listening and sentiment scoring, we were able to track all of the negative and positive conversations that happened during their scheduled downtime. And what we found was that 80% of the negative chatter online about their scheduled downtimes were about the fact that overdraft protection was not available or active during said downtimes. So we took this back to the executives and we said, hey, look, 80% of people don't like that overdraft protection's not available during downtimes. Now, they could have gone and they could have been more transparent in their messaging and said, hey, during downtimes, overdraft protection won't work, XYZ. But what they did is they took it a step further. They actually decided that they were going to remove that overdraft protection not being available during downtimes, meaning it would be available during downtimes. So people would not have to worry about overdrafting just because the bank was going through a downtime. Remember what Jay said earlier about people willing to switch banks? This is what's so important about social listening. It allows you to gather social intelligence on the why, not the what, but the why. And then that negative feedback is actually a catalyst for change. How happy do you think their customers were, especially those 80% who complained, when they were able to say, hey, we heard you, we understand what you're saying, and we're not going to do that anymore. That is huge, especially for a financial brand in today's times. The other thing that you can do with social listening is start to code and tag all of your content that goes out. So this is an example of a brand with many product lines. So they actually tag all of their product lines with social listening so that any content they put out gets tagged with that product line, and any conversations coming in about the product lines get tagged. So they can see at any given time how much content they're publishing around specific product lines within the brand, but also how much conversations happening online, chatters happening online about specific products. And then digging into those tags, they can see the positive, negative, and neutral sentiment and start to understand what's going well with those product lines and what's not going well. Also, potentially where a PR crisis might be bubbling, right? And when it comes to acquisition and retention, which I was talking about earlier, this is my number one piece of advice if you use social listening and tagging. Start to tag every inbound conversation that comes in as acquisition or retention, meaning that pre-purchase or that post-purchase question. I showed you all of those examples. When we went to our clients and we said, how much of the social conversation do you think was acquisition? Meaning you could make money off of what's happening with your organic social. They said, 0 to 5%. Across the board, all of their answers were under 5%. So we started going through and tagging all of that incoming conversations as acquisition or retention. And here's one client. It's a billion-dollar tech brand. And here's 1 month of data that we have for tagging acquisition or retention. This is 4 of their product lines. Each of the 4 product lines all had over 20% acquisition. Some of the product lines, product C, had almost 40% acquisition chatter happening on organic social. That is money right there on the table. You constantly hear people saying, my social strategy doesn't work. My content's terrible. I'm telling you how to fix it. You've got to do more content with opinions and feelings. You've got to align people with your brand values, and you have to spend time online answering these acquisition and retention questions. 40% is huge. That's a lot of money that they would be leaving on the table if they weren't there answering those questions in real time or as real time as possible. So 4 was analyze. So measure your performance and sentiment. I can't tell you what your business goals are, right? But start there. What are we trying to do with our social-led customer care? Maybe it's just find out how much acquisition and retention conversations happening. If that's a business goal, then your key performance indicator would be to start tagging those conversations as acquisition and retention, and then looking at the metrics. 40% of product C is acquisition. What did that client do? They actually went back to their sales team we dug into what the conversation was actually asking questions about. Obviously, we added those frequently asked questions to our FAQ documentation, but then the sales team is now helping create nurture content. So deeper level content that meets some of those frequently asked questions for product C, so that now when we get those answers, we can have very robust pieces of collateral to share with them to hopefully then acquire them. So that's how you break that down. But when you're looking at your metrics, again, because I can't tell you what they are, I want you to start to understand the why, right? Why do customers buy from us? Hopefully, or why they don't. What or why do potential customers buy from our competitors? Because guess what? With social listening, you can look at your competitors' conversations and see what's positive, neutral, or negative. And then why is our product or service X under or overperforming? You should be able to look at that social chatter and start to identify pain points or potholes in the digital customer journey that we just talked about. Here's an example. We work with a luxury appliance brand, and they put out a very expensive cappuccino machine. We're talking like thousands of dollars. And when they put out this machine, normally we see really positive sentiment, right? Positive conversation happening on social. Well, we didn't. We saw a lot of negative conversation happening. So we dug in to that information, and we saw that people kept complaining about the coffee filter in their very expensive machine. They couldn't figure out how to change the coffee filter. So we went back to the client and we said, people can't figure out how to change the coffee filter. What kind of information do you have for people who can't change the filter in this new product? And they said, oh, it's, every machine comes with a product manual and it's on page like 437. Well, guess what? Nobody wants to read a 437 page service manual to figure out how to change their coffee filter. So we told them that they should create a video showing how to change the coffee filter and put it on the product page. And then what happens as a consumer when you can't change the coffee filter, you go to Google, you Google the product name, how to change coffee filter, that video shows up. When people ask us questions through social, retention questions, how do I do this? We can send them to the video. So you can see that once we put this video out, over time, not only did the negative conversation go down, the positive conversation went up. And what happens when positive conversation is happening on social? Usually there's peer-to-peer recommendations happen, which means there's more acquisition happens, which means more sales, and brands are very happy with more sales. So how do we innovate based on the voice of the customer, or VOC? I've got 5 tips for you here as well. So I want you to accept that social is skyrocketing. Even if you're not that present on social, that's okay. You can do a quick little study to find out if people are talking about you on social. You can do Google Alerts, right? That's free. You can set up a Google Alert for your brand, or you can go to mention.com and they have, I think, 1 free alert where you could set up like your brand name and it will listen online and you can see where people are potentially talking about you. If you have a ton of people talking about you on Twitter, maybe you should be active there and consider a social-led customer care strategy on Twitter. So lean into the power of social. There's so much happening with online shopping. People are now relying on social media more and more to make shopping decisions. So if you haven't really put your effort into social, I would definitely get started because I don't think that's going to change. Know your digital customer's journey, that little DCJ that I showed you, the flywheel and the stages of the digital customer journey. Know what your touch points are. So identify where you have the most or the best conversations with your audiences or your community. And that will help tell you where to spend most of your time. It'll also help you understand where to fix some of those pain points within your digital customer journey. And then I want you to listen, learn, and take the lead, AKA use social listening. Listening to the customer cannot be overstated, right? There is no loyalty. There is no trust. And that's because most brands really don't care or don't seem to care about their customers. If you can listen, if you can take that negative feedback and turn it into a communication point, a conversation point, and fix that problem, you can do a lot to create trust and loyalty with new and current customers. The very few brands who are doing this right are paying attention to those needs. They're looking at all of those insights, and then they're adapting their strategy based on the voice of the customer. So I want you to get really good at social listening, not just social monitoring, and it will help you have a gold mine of information at your fingertips to make better data-driven decisions. I also want you to be a negative Nancy, right? Not that I want you to have a negative attitude, but I want you to dig into that negative customer feedback, because if you do, it's a superpower. People can talk about you wonderfully all day long. That's great, but there's no catalyst for change there, and no one is perfect. So if you can dig into where the negative is happening, that's where you can actually find catalyst to make change. So all of that customer data, including social media intelligence, is a strategic advantage for you. People go onto social and they give you all kinds of information. If you're not collecting that, you're leaving money on the table. This is how you develop stronger relationships. This is how you create better conversations that connect. And this is how you improve your customer experiences. And then finally, obviously, I want you to build conversations that connect. So if you think about the social penetration theory, that should help you with your content. It doesn't have to be hard. Go look at LinkedIn Marketing Solutions on LinkedIn. They do such a great job of putting out opinion and feeling content. And that's a B2B brand, right? Most B2B brands are considered boring. They're not boring at all. They're using opinion and feeling content to have those conversations with the connect. And that's why they have like 4+ million followers on LinkedIn, right? It's not hard. It's just that we tend to sit in that cliche and fact area with our content, and that does nothing to build trust or loyalty. So if you can figure out how to use opinions and feelings in your content, have better conversations, improve your digital customer journey, and deliver stellar community customer experience, that's how you create brand loyalty. Yes, it's waning, but that's because very, 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 very few brands are doing this. So I really want you to do this. And if you love what I've been talking about today, it's all coming from my new book, Conversations That Connect. Again, go to that bit.ly B2 book link. You can get a free excerpt, and we're doing a bunch of contests and goodies previous to the book launching. So I encourage you to go check it out, sign up, and win some cool stuff. With that, let's go into Q&A if there's any Q&A.
Yes, we do have some questions. So you were talking about building the FAQ database for your entire team to use. What solution do you recommend for putting that in an easily searchable manner?
That's a great question. So if you use any sort of CRM or project management software, so for us, we use Basecamp as our project management software. So that's kind of, the HQ central for all of our projects and all of that documentation. But if you don't use that, that's fine too. You could use a Google Doc. You could use a Google Doc, make sure that everybody has access to that link. Everybody who needs to is able to comment, edit, etc., and then house all of those frequently asked questions there. Have that link, saved somewhere or easily available for the team so that they can click in when they get one of those questions, scroll down to the section about, changing the printer or changing the ink in a printer, and then read through to answer a question that might fall under that category.
I would think that some of the support ticket solutions might have a FAQ database built into them.
Like a Zendesk or something. Yeah. I mean, listen, we work with so many different clients and everybody has their own system. So there's no wrong way to do it. I think literally you could use like a Google Docs, which is free, or you could go all the way up and use like your CRM, like a Zoho or a Salesforce or, whatever it may be. Or like I said, a project management software. So there's like, Basecamp, there's Trello, there's so many different project management, teamwork that you could use to house all of that information.
I think a lot of them wouldn't be very good for that, though. I love Trello, but if you have a lot of data in there, searching is not very usable. I use Reich Enterprise,
Yeah.
and I can't imagine using it for that. I maybe could. I mean, I really feel like you need a database to do that. So anyway, that may be a question that's beyond what we're really talking about today. I just thought maybe you had a solution that you commonly recommended. Claire Watson asked, she said, we try to set hours that make us highly responsive, but also give our social team boundaries for their well-being. Publicizing hours may upset customers who want to see us available longer or at later times. How do you walk the line of setting realistic expectations without upsetting your guests? Does the pro outweigh the con here?
Yeah. So I think what you're doing by putting those office hours up are A, setting those boundaries and those expectations. But B, you could also then figure out how in the off hours when your team's not available, how you might be able to use bots to help with some of those frequently asked questions. So you could set up the bot to be very friendly. Tell people it's a bot. Tell people like, hi, our humans are sleeping right now because their well-being is very important to us, because guess what that's doing? That's showing your brand values to that customer or potential customer. And say, how can I help you? Give that menu of options with the bot. And if their question can't be answered through, kind of the workflows that you create through using a bot, then you could have that, I need a human button in the menu option. And then once they hit that, your team's not available. They know this, but you could kind of repeat that messaging. Thanks so much. We understand you need a human. Our humans are sleeping right now. Their well-being is important to us, but we will have someone get back to you. And then tell them when you're going to get within 24 hours. And then make sure that you not only get back to them within that 24 hours, but you do it in 20. You know what I mean? So set that boundary and that expectation, but then beat it, right? Never be late. Always be early.
I really like that, because I really hate it when bots try to pretend they're human.
Oh, don't do that.
Yeah, and I think that by making it, like giving them a reason, I think people always accept news they don't like better when you give them a reason why why we value our employees and they have to sleep sometime, right? And so, yeah, I really like, that's a great idea. I like that.
But also you're doing exactly what I said we should be doing, right? You're showing the company value, the brand values. And I'm assuming that most customers will appreciate that. They may not if they're in an irate moment, but if you do get back to them in the 20 hours and you're able to solve that problem and do it with empathy and personalization, then I think ultimately that will draw them closer to you because they can see that you value your team.
I like that you give them some idea, right? Like you say, we'll get back to you. That maybe, yeah, maybe never. But if it's within X time, then at least you have some idea when you hopefully will hear from them. And then if you don't, you can follow up with them. Claire responded that she loves the idea of using voice and leaning into values through a bot. Thank you. Claire, I did turn on your ability to talk if you'd like to join our conversation. And while you're thinking about that or deciding if you want to do that, I had another question. You kept talking about doing tagging the acquisitions and the redemptions. What are you tagging them in? Sprout Social or something else like after the fact?
Yeah,
Okay.
so all social listening tools have, some of them call it tagging, some of them call it labeling. It's the same thing, right? You're labeling that conversation, whether it's outgoing from the brand or incoming from your audience. And you can use several different labels. So, if we're using the brother printer example, it could be tagged as the printer, right? The actual product. But it could also be tagged as acquisition or retention. And then it could also be tagged as like issue or UGC, meaning user generated content, meaning we need to pass that to the content team so they can potentially build content around it. So you can use all kinds of labels and tags. It's just a way to start to code all of the conversations that are coming in so that you're gathering that social intelligence, and then you're able to slice and dice all of that information on all of the conversations in a million different ways, because it can be overwhelming, right? Especially for like a high volume brand. If you get a lot of conversation happening on social, it can be very overwhelming to try to decipher what all of that conversation means. But if you use tags, you can start to kind of slice and dice and put things into categories and better build out some of those anecdotes that you might need to present to your executives or CMO or whatnot.
Okay, so I invited Claire to join us on audio if she'd like to. Claire, would you like to say anything?
Is my audio working? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, it is.
Right. Yeah, I just think this is incredibly creative. I think for us as a brand, we've always strayed away from bots because they're so impersonal. Because I've had my own fair share of negative experiences with bots when you just really need to get a hold of a person. So I think playing with it and making it fun and making it transparent. But yeah, I am a bot. Maybe I can help direct you. But if not, my sleeping human will get back to you tomorrow. I just think that's wonderful and so creative.
Oh, wonderful. I'm so glad. Yeah. I'm with you, Claire. We found in most situations, bots do not work. And the reason people really want to use bots is for that responsiveness, right? Because they're looking for a very quick reply. And unfortunately, we have to sleep as humans. So yeah, I think if you play with it and you just be super transparent, because we know that's what people want anyway, as part of that whole trust and loyalty thing. Like, look, I'm a bot. My people are sleeping, but I'm going to try to help you. And if I can't, just hit this little button over here and it's going to send an email to Claire and she will get back to you within 24 hours. And then make sure, Claire, that you get back to them well under that 24 hours. And it's almost, I won't say entirely, but almost impossible that they would be upset, right?
I agree. And the way our team works is, in reality, they'd have an answer within 12 hours at most. So that makes a lot of sense for us. And then thank you again, just on the conversation about acquisition is fascinating. I think we've always looked at customer care in social, especially. It's always just retention. And I think my team feels that way. And it can be kind of a slog when you just hear the negative and you just hear from people who need help. So I think going into non-mentions and making your way, making it a point of your strategy to go get those acquisition guests, it's really great for us to think about this year.
Yeah, test it out. It's so interesting. And you know what else happens? The executives get really excited about social again, because you constantly hear people say, like, there's no money in organic social. Yes, there is. You just have to be listening, and then you have to be super responsive, and then you kind of have to know how much of that acquisition volume is coming in, which is why social listening helps. But yeah, there's money on the table if brands are willing to do the deep work, is what I say, to figure out what those conversations are and then how to grab that acquisition when it's happening. Because what we found is, like, people are in the buying moment when they ask those acquisition questions. So part of what I challenge our clients with is, bartenders have those little bar tabs so that, like, if a drink gets made wrong or if there's a long wait, like, they have a certain amount every night that they're allowed to, like, give away. Consider giving your front line that bar tab, right? That social support tab, so that if somebody does come through with an acquisition question, you can say, hey, here's your answer. And if you buy today using this code or this link, you can get free shipping, or you can get 10% off, or whatever it is that you're allowed to, give away, to help people make that purchase that day. Right? There's revenue for the brand. The execs are going to love that, but they're also going to love that you can attribute that to your organic social care team. So then you start to obviously build value, and we can stop being looked at as a non-valuable channel, because we are so valuable.
I kind of find that really surprising, because I often would go on the social to ask a question about something I'm thinking about buying. So I'm surprised. But the other thing that bothers me is retention. All right. Repeat customer loyalty is more valuable to almost any brand than new acquisition. So keeping the customers you already have really happy is really important.
Cool.
And that surprises me too, that, I worked for IBM for a long time, and IBM means service was our logo in service. And it always irritated me that they didn't understand that the reason people bought IBM was for the service.
Mm,
You just consider service just an outgo, an expense, instead of contributing to new sales. You don't understand your business model very well.
yes, I have a whole section about retention and churn in the book. And I go deep into exactly what you're saying. Like, it's crazy to me that even if we left acquisition on the table, which we shouldn't, but even if we just focused on social support in the way of retention, that's so much money, that's so much loyalty. And like, no one still does it. It really blows my mind. Like, this is all right here. It's low hanging fruit, as we like to say, right? It's all right here in front of you. And yet so few brands are doing it.
Your book might help them out some.
I hope so.
I'm almost afraid to do this, but I want to ask both of you a question. All right, especially since you're recommending that they be kind of personal in what they say. A brand, the broader your audience is, the bigger a minefield that is. And I think that a lot of people don't recognize that the world isn't like them, right? So I think if your brand is going to do that, you need to have a bunch of people around a table or a Zoom or wherever that are different ages and different backgrounds, discussing what kind of stuff you are going to put out there. Because I think that, I'll give you, this is a bad example. This is a carefully worded, politically incorrect thing. There are people who love you if you put your pronouns on your profile. There are people who will not follow or interact with you because you put your pronouns on your profile, even if they're normal, what they would consider original pronoun. Let's say original pronouns. And so I think that you have to be careful. It's like Chick-fil-A put themselves very firmly in the Christian box.
I use them as an example in the book. Chick-fil-A and Nike, right? Two sides of the fence. They both knew their audiences so well, though, because when they aligned with the values they did. Chick-fil-A, with their Christian values and speaking out against the LGBTQ community, and Nike aligning with Colin Kaepernick and Black Lives Matter. They only did that because they knew their audiences through and through. In both scenarios, both sides of the fence, both brands made those statements, but their stock and their business, revenue skyrocketed after doing it. Yes, they had the dissolution that we talked about with the social penetration. There were people, burning their Nikes online, but they knew that the majority of their audience aligned with those values. So you have to have enough social intelligence and information to understand truly who your audience is. And if you do, you can make some of those riskier feeling statements or riskier brand value statements like Patagonia, like Nike, like Chick-fil-A. I have a lot of other examples in the book too. Ben & Jerry's is one of the brands that I mentioned. But you first have to know your audience inside and out before you go that far.
I think it was a win for them, and they knew what they were doing. What I'm concerned with is that people raised totally differently. Like, I will tell you, I'm old, all right? I'm 65. People that are 20 something were raised with a totally different view of the world, moral standards. What they consider common and normal to them is not common and normal to someone older, and they wouldn't even have to be as old as me. And there's a lot of older people these days. People may not notice there's lots of older people. So I think a brand has to be careful. If like all their social media people are 20-ish, but their audience isn't, that their social media people are going to say things that are going to offend possibly their core audience, and have no idea they're even doing it. And right. So I think a brand really has to be aware that people have changed. The world has changed in ways that no one could have imagined. People my age who are not online, it would be like if they went to New York or to San Francisco, it would be like a decade ago or a century ago being dropped in a different country, right? It's just so dramatically different.
It's going to keep changing. One of the things I say in the book too is really you can't look at any of your past data because of the pandemic. All sorts of baselines, consumer behaviors have changed. So anything older than 2020 is really almost too old to be relevant. So you have to be looking, 2020 forward. You kind of have to redo that audience research if you did it in 2018 because so much has changed. So many more people have joined online, are now shopping online. A lot of the older generations have come around to, being present on social. So I think it's just a constant look and iteration of all of the social intelligence that you're gathering to make your decisions. And yeah, you have to do the deep work on content too, all based on audience. So, everybody thinks social is easy and it's just really not if you want to do it right.
So Claire, did you have anything you'd like to contribute?
Interestingly enough, I fall directly in social care and listening. So I don't have marketing experience that would really speak to that. I know I can speak to being with a very large brand, and I know we err on the side of safe, right? I think it's interesting. Most PR teams will tell you that walking the line is easier than being a Chick-fil-A or a Nike. But I think I'll be interested in the following years to see what kind of studies show the value behind what Chick-fil-A and what Nike have done, because clearly there is value there, although of course it's going to be tailored to each brand.
Yeah, there's no blanket statement anymore. They know their audiences inside and out, and they were able to take those riskier value stands based on knowing their audiences really well. So I think, you can go further and further into that feelings type of content and brand values type of content, but only if you've done the deep work on audience.
I think that there's going to be a lot more division, a lot more, like I even see it in advertising, right? So if I see an ad when the person has a wild color of hair, all kinds of piercings, and their whole body tattooed, their audience is clearly not my age, because people my age would not would not identify with that at all. And so I think that the brands have already made their decisions when they're putting out the advertising that they put out, but the young people, like if you have a very young team talking to an older audience or vice versa, even that people, I just want brands to be aware that they should talk to their young team, because the person that hired them may not have any idea how different that person is. These people that are doing their frontline social may have their idea of what's acceptable is wildly different than the brand values sometimes. Like the words that they would use, the kind of kidding they might do. There's just a lot of minefield there. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And thank you so much for this jam-packed episode. And I want to let everybody know Brooke's information is on the screen so you can see how to get a hold of her and find out more and look at her book. I also want to let you know that this is the bizsugar Mastermind community. We do these webinars on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month at noon Central. And so you can also see all of our past webinars. This video will end up in the blog post and linked from our webinar page, which can be found at blog.bizsugar.com/webinars. And with that, we are done. Thank you.
Y'all.
Thank you, Brooke, and thank you, Claire, for contributing.